Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Professor Barry here. We are moving on this week into a concept called the treadmill of production. And the resources, some of the sources for this week are going to be focused on what's called the degrowth economy, kind of explaining the degrowth economy and the value and the importance of it. So I think talking about the treadmill of production kind of sets you up for the resources for the week. And there's going to be a link that we're going to make to neoliberalism, the concept, a concept from last week. Just want to bring up real quick. So I mentioned two sources at the end of last week, or for last week's lecture. One of them is a book by Wendy Brown, political scientist, who talks about or in this book, the origins, the history of the expansion of neoliberal thought and idea. It's a real important, I think, and also really valuable read if you're trying to understand what neoliberalism is. And she provides a critique of, the challenge of neoliberal thought and how it's encroached upon government policies and how it's had an adversely impacted our communities and us as individual citizens. And then Naomi Klein, a journalist who wrote this book called The Shock Doctrine, The Rise of Disaster Capitalism, specifically focused on the University of Chicago School of Economics and researchers and economists from that particular university who are working in collaboration with the US government and the CIA and different bodies of the US government to expand economic policies in different countries for basically control and contain different countries and their economies for our own economic development. And that fits into this sort of neoliberal kind of thought and idea as well. And also the treadmill production, where a focus of governments start to become on getting on the treadmill of producing more and more, that increasing gross domestic product, this idea of GDP, is a way to create a better society and better lives is through mass consumption. And now we're at the place where there's more of a critique of that model. So the treadmill production is a critique of the idea of we need to just continue to have continued growth and expansion. So that's kind of like a little bit of background, and this is where we're going to go for this week, talk about this concept, and then at the end, I'll mention I'll mention the articles and how they relate to this concept. Now, I mean, this treadmill of production theory, it's a theory, it's a body of theory that's been applied to the contemporary world. There's a lot going on here. So we're just going to touch down, hit some highlights, and encourage you to look into it more if you are interested. But I think the basic idea is pretty straightforward, that we can get into space that get into a space that we or nations get into a space where they're growing their economies at a rate, a continued growth and expansion, that at a certain point, that growth and expansion has an increased environmental impact, or the environmental impacts get more and more severe. So the treadmill production theory is giving recognition or it identifies there's a conflict between economic growth and the environmental quality. That you increase growth, you keep on expanding growth, there's going to be the externalities in economics terms. The externalities are going to be an impact on the environment. Think about fossil fuel, think about any energy system for that matter, that we keep on using more and more energy. Well, that's coming from somewhere, and that could have an environmental impact of how that resource is being drawn and used. The treadmill, I think it's important to recognize, the treadmill production theory identifies that this is facilitated by both producers. So corporations, companies are facilitating getting us as governments and as consumers, getting us on this treadmill of continued growth and expansion, that it's facilitated by both producers, because producers gain from us becoming more and more, producing more, we're going to be consuming more, it's just increases profit margins. So producers are going to benefit from this, and consumers are also driving this. And you can get into a lot of debate and discussion or focus on, well, why do consumers consume that the way they do? Is there a lot of stuff that's going on in terms of the way we've been socialized into consumption in ways that advertising, marketing are encouraging us to do things that are against our own interest? But the treadmill production basically is recognizing that this is a problem that's being generated by both producers as well as consumers. And that corporate and economic interest help facilitate getting countries and places and people on the treadmill and staying on the treadmill. So we get told that we need to keep on growing as our economy, and the economy keeps keep growing. And one way through growth is through production. And this is a way for creating a stable social order and bringing it's better for society and it's better for people. I mean, it's a very common story. Think about that in here in Central Oregon. I mean, Central Oregon, a place of continued growth and expansion, building and development. Now, there's some level of that that's really valuable and beneficial. The treadmill of production theory would start to question that, getting to this mindset where local governments are getting this mindset of continued growth and expansion, that it has environmental impacts in doing so. And it may not be in the interest of the community itself. So the treadmill facilitates the expansion of mass consumption, getting on the treadmill, staying on the treadmill, this treadmill of consumption, treadmill of production, and I'd say it's treadmill of consumption as well. And then once you get on it, it's difficult to get off. Like, we've created an economy in the United States based on mass consumption and based on the ways that we produce, that it's going to be very difficult to shift course and go a different direction. If American consumers stopped going, decrease their levels of debt through consuming less, and we consumed fewer things, it would have an impact in terms of our economic impact. And not that it would be something that have to be worked through, but it'd be very difficult to get us off, because you have to change the way that which producers operate and the way consumers behave. And that can be a difficult thing to do. So to get to the treadmill production theory, the theory doesn't get developed until the 1980s, but a little bit of like background of escalating production and consumption. And I would mark, you could probably mark different time periods, the different eras of consumption. I think one of the more, I think a really powerful shift in consumption was post-World War II. Televisions are coming into American homes and households. It's the expansion of suburbia. It's the era of starting mass consumption. Globalization is going on at a different level than before. And it even, go 1970s, we're going to even change even more and go into a world of globalization and mass consumption. But one way of marking this, I think, this historical moment was, it's called the kitchen debate between Vice President Richard Nixon and Nikita Khrushchev from Russia at the American National Exposition in Moscow in 1959. And Nixon was showcasing or sharing with Khrushchev, like, here's the American kitchen, and look at all the consumer items in here, the blenders, the refrigerator, all these different things that, this is, we are producing all these consumer goods and items that's bringing happiness and welfare and greater things to the American public. This is the spirit of capitalism, and this is what what capitalism can do for a community and society. Expansion of suburbs in the 1950s. We moved from starting, at some point we moved from a society based on thrift, saving, to spending, and spending and consuming. I recall back real quick on after 9/11. Remember President Bush said that after the fall of the Twin Towers, after 9/11, Bush talked with American people about, make sure you continue to consume. And it became a little bit controversial, but, I think it's a statement about our economy is built on consumption. And he said, what we need to do is we need to go out and do what we always do. This is how we need to be able to kind of fight things and fight the war, is through continuing our behavior, continuing our consumption. We need it for our economy. Like, this is for me, a reflection of kind of where our economy was and where it is. We are on the treadmill. And that the way the treadmill operates is that, more consumer items, there's things that items are built for obsolescence. They're planned that way. They're planned to have short shelf lives. So products, they don't last as long as let's say they once did. My mom had a sewing machine that she bought when she was in high school. And she still sews on it. So she's been sewing on that sewing machine for 60 some years. That's not planned obsolescence. That's like durability, right? Durable goods that last for a long time. maybe this treadmill is facilitated by new technologies like plastics, right? Things can be produced for cheaper, can produce more. Globalization, a focus for consumers on we want things cheaper, not necessarily greater quality, but people are consuming more. Things are cheaper, so we can consume more. But there's an environmental consequence you can see to this. Things like the landfill, for example, and what we consume if we're focusing on quantity versus quality. So the treadmill production theory gets formulated in the early 1980s. It's in the age of expansion of globalization, neoliberal thought and ideas, expanding markets, right? This is neoliberalism, expanding markets, deregulating or decreasing regulations of companies and governments, or government deregulating or decreasing regulations of the private sector of companies. It's expansion, growth, profit. I mean, that becomes more and more the focus. So this theory addresses the link between corporate interests, institutions of production, and governmental policies that adversely affect the environment or the ecology. So this theory is addressing that there's a link between the corporate sector and the government. This isn't a theory of neoliberal thought, but it's a theory that you could say has some of the ideas of neoliberal critiquing neoliberalism is going on within this treadmill of production theory. It also addresses the limitations of proposed technological solutions to ecological problems. So, that there's a limitation, of focusing on, we can have plastics that degrade faster or that are less environmental impacts. The environmental impacts are fewer of certain materials that were used in our clothing, in our consumer goods. This idea of forever chemicals and putting regulations on forever chemicals and coming up with alternatives. I mean, that's great, but this theory is also addressing that there's a limitation to that we need to be talking about decreasing our consumption and decreasing the speed of the treadmill or getting us off the treadmill. So it's addressing the limitations. Sometimes the focus that gets promoted is that we can work ourselves out of this problem by we can continue our consumption patterns if we just create new technologies with goods that are more environmentally sound, more green products, so to speak. And this theory is critiquing that idea. And then there's a different counter view. It's called the ecological modernization view that views that there's been an increased separation of the private sector from governmental policies, and that the private sector, if left alone or left less regulated, is going to respond to consumer demand. If consumers are demanding more environmentally friendly products, companies are going to respond to that by creating greater efficiencies, by doing things in a more environmentally friendly, environmentally conscious way. And that's going to be brought to the marketplace where we consume. And that's how we kind of work ourselves through this problem. And there's a critique of that model as well. But that's kind of a counter to this treadmill production idea. I think it's important real quick. I'm just going to spend a few more minutes just talking about capitalism and socialism. Capitalism, means of production are owned by the private sector. The idea is that profit facilitates innovations, efficiencies. It's a way of responding to human needs. And the role of the government is to enforce laws, rules, regulations to help create a more even playing field between competing companies. That helps facilitate greater efficiencies and innovations. And that's kind of like the general idea of capitalism versus socialism, where the means of production are owned by the state or owned by the public. So, a national healthcare system where the government is either owning or more directly involved in it is more socialist minded versus capitalism, where it's happening in a private sector place. It's the private enterprises that through profit, they're doing things, they're engaged in, let's say, research and development. And it's through all that they're bringing, that capitalism is bringing benefit to communities. Now, okay, so then also socialism, focus on decreasing economic inequality is an important part for socialist-minded or socialist-based policies of creating a more fair playing field, but also decreasing economic inequality, more even distribution of resources. And the role of government is to provide for the health and well-being of the public. Now, I want to bring this up to say that not is to identify that the United States, there's no nation that is purely one or the other. Even in places like, say, like, well, Venezuela, or I mean, Cuba, China, Russia, we're going to get, we're going to get you're going to get further and further into like the communism or socialist based ideas. But there's still free marketplace ideas that are going, there's still markets going on there. And then you get into places like the United States, we have a mixed economy, a mixed-based economy where we have Medicare, which is a socialist-based program, Medicaid, socialist-based program. We have public schools, infrastructure. So we have a combination between private and public. And I bring this up here to identify that, no nation is purely capitalist or socialist. Mixed economies. Some are more embracing the ideas of capitalism, some more socialism. And the link here I want to make is that neoliberalism is facilitating decreasing the regulations from government, moving further and further into a closer to like a purely capitalist system where it's the marketplace is determining. But the treadmill production and other critiques like Wendy Brown and others are recognizing and identifying that neoliberal thought, moving countries into a place that's more, government's more independent, where the private sector is allowed to do it, to engage in practices that can have an impact that's detrimental to people and community, that this is represents economic interest and political interest and not the interest of the community itself. And increased privatization is a problem. And all these ideas are built upon, in some ways, from a treadmill production viewpoint, we got into this space of focus on increasing production, and there's been cost to this. And the one thing to think about or consider is like, what is that ratio or right configuration between private enterprise, the government, and regulations? And that's like a valuable thing to discuss and debate and kind of figure out, is how do we think about regulation? How do we think about the role of government? And then what's our role as consumers? So the course materials for the week are, there's a podcast, David Hinkle, and I think it's a really valuable podcast that provides a comprehensive viewpoint of these different ideas within contemporary economic thought, of the degrowth economy, the green economy, the different ways of thinking about economic development, and recognizing that decreasing production and decreasing consumption is necessary for humanity. And then there's a Vox video, a pretty short video. It's called The Lies That Fast Fashion. I think fast fashion is a demonstration of this treadmill production. It's like, buying more, consuming more. It's the quantity versus the quality. It's built into kind of the system of the whole segment of the fashion industry. And so that's kind of this is videos like critiquing fast fashion. And then a video of like why we need degrowth. So the benefit and value of a degrowth economy. And then I put a couple of resources out there for you if you're interested. Yeah, I hope you enjoy the readings for the week. I think they're really important, really valuable. And I just kind of want to end with that. The material like these, like Hinkle talking about the degrowth economy or donut hole economics, like this is something that's going on now in the world around us, where there's more and more space for talking about and critiquing the model that was sort of being promoted through neoliberal thought and idea, and a focus on increasing GDP is the way to create a better, safer, healthier society. There's more economists today who are talking about, who are focused on how do we create an economy where there's a good balance between production and well-being of community and society and the environment. So it's not just GDP, but it's looking at life satisfaction, environmental impact, and a lot of different kind of things. So anyway, hope you find the information really valuable, interesting. This focus on the degrowth economy. Have a great day. Have a great week. And catch you next time.